The UK's ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, has been sacked today after days of media scrutiny over his links to disgraced financier and convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Calls for his resignation were ignited by revelations published last week in the Wall Street Journal, who released alleged contributions by Mandelson to the infamous Epstein birthday book that was subpoenaed by the US House Oversight Committee. We cover those revelations on Tuesday's show, but today's resignation comes after new information was released by Bloomberg regarding email exchanges between Mandelson and Epstein from around about 2008, whilst Mandelson was the European Trade Commissioner and after Epstein had been convicted on child sex offences. Here's how Bloomberg broke the story. Bloomberg News has obtained more than 100 previously unreported emails between Epstein and Mandelson from 2005 through 2010, casting new light on the relationship between the two men and showing that it was deeper than previously known. That connection continued long after Epstein's behaviour made international news, the emails show. From the moment the first allegations against Epstein became public in 2006, Mandelson showed his American friends steadfast support. The longtime politician and diplomat gave Epstein advice, suggesting he fight back using techniques from Sun Tzu's Art of War. And this is a quote, "Reminder, you are fighting back, so you need strategy, strategy, strategy. Remember the art of war." They went on to describe a key email from June 2008, the day before Epstein reported to prison, in which Mandelson suggested that Epstein should fight for early release, and that he told Epstein, quote, "Your friends stay with you and love you," unquote. These revelations came just hours after Keir Starmer repeatedly defended his appointment of the former ambassador on multiple occasions during a pretty rare spate of forensic questioning by opposition leader Kemi Badenoch during Prime Minister's questions, which only adds to the political humiliation of being left with no choice but to let Mandelson go after these new details emerged. Prime Minister Keir Starmer and newly appointed Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper reportedly took the decision to sack the ambassador when meeting in Downing Street on Thursday morning. According to Robert Peston, Starmer had reviewed the email exchanges released on Wednesday overnight, and it is the new information that revealed Mandelson's view that Epstein's conviction was potentially wrongful that led to the decision to remove him from the post. This embarrassing ordeal for Starmer is far from over, however. Questions will need to be asked about how much he was known to the PM and his leadership team when Mandelson was appointed, and indeed why, given what was already known at the time of his links to Epstein. The opposition, fresh from intense scrutiny over the first set of revelations at PMQs on Wednesday, have been buoyed by the scandal. With the cloud of Mandelson's sacking still hanging over the PM, Tory right-winger MP Neil O'Brien fired a second broadside at the embattled PM this morning.
This is yet another extraordinary error of judgment by this weak Prime Minister. And I pay tribute to the Leader of the Opposition for yesterday securing justice for the victims of Epstein. This raises massive questions. It is not just that Peter Mandelson said that Epstein was his best pal and that he loved him. It wasn't just that he brokered a deal for him while he was business secretary. We now, of course, know that he was working for Epstein's early release after he was convicted. And the simple question is this. Is the Minister now saying that the Prime Minister did not know about any of this at the point where he was appointed? Don't say the boxes were ticked and the process was followed. What did the Prime Minister know at the point of his appointment? Our Minister this morning said, "My understanding was that all of the information was present." Is that correct? Did the Prime Minister know, and will the government now publish all the documents relating to Peter Mandelson's vetting? And if the Minister says he doesn't know at the time, when did the Prime Minister become aware of these revelations? Now, Peter Mandelson quietly stayed at Epstein's house while he was in prison. Mandelson now says that he was wrong to think he was innocent. That's his defence. He had pleaded guilty. So there are huge questions here, Mr. Speaker. Did the State Department, the US State Department, give any warning to our government ahead of this appointment? Did the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, give any warning? Have any employees of Global Counsel visited our Washington embassy since his appointment? Next week is going to be the state visit. This is a huge turmoil ahead of it, and I cannot believe that the government have put our monarch in this terrible position. I am glad that Peter Mandelson has now gone. The Foreign Secretary had said that protecting women, girls and victims was her priority. How on earth did that square with the behaviour of the government over recent days, squirming and twisting to try and protect Peter Mandelson rather than the victims?
I do find it interesting that and now it's apparently okay to pronounce it Epstein. I thought that wasn't okay. At least it wasn't when Corbyn said it. But overall, he is right. The victims had already called for Mandelson to be sacked over the initial birthday book leaks, in which Mandelson described Epstein as his, quote, best pal. It seems nakedly hypocritical that a government supposedly committed to protecting women and girls would have waited so long to heed the calls of the kind of victims they say they want to support. The link between political expediency of a principle was also highlighted by newly minted Green Party leader Zach Polanski speaking to Politics Joe on Wednesday.
This is a man who stands for nothing. He has no morals, no values, no principles, and he will defend Peter Mandelson up until the point he thinks he needs to for his own career. And I think that's the only thing he cares about at this point.
Now, where is the lie? This has purely been an exercise in political expediency for the government. Now, what this reminds me of, it's reminiscent of the debacle surrounding Rochdale by-election candidate Azhar Ali, where Starmer gave him his full backing for a whole day after he implied that October the 7th was an inside job, until the press dropped leaked audio about him talking about, quote, people from the media and Jewish quarters, forcing Starmer into a humiliating U-turn to then remove his support for the candidate for the by-election. But what I will say is something doesn't really add up here. Peter Mandelson was already an unpopular figure even before this week's bombshells, having resigned as a government minister twice under New Labour for alleged impropriety. Now, this is in addition to his known historic links with Epstein and links to Russian oligarchs, both in a personal capacity and through his consulting firm Global Counsel. There was also previously a universally well-liked and long-term US ambassador already in place who had curried favour with the Trump campaign administration. We were told that was what Mandelson was good at, currying favour with Trump. But there was already someone in place who could do that. And even Pat McFadden, the Labour heavyweight, had described as having full confidence of the government in the previous ambassador. So why was Mandelson appointed in the first place? This brings the political judgment of Keir Starmer into sharp focus. The first year of his premiership has been beset by scandal after scandal, despite his insistence pre-election that he would end the Tory chaos. And here we are, yet again, with another Keir Starmer ally seemingly being given special treatment up until they were impossible to defend. Is this what adults in the room looks like? Is this what putting the country before party looks like? These were the same people who justified blocking left-wingers to be MPs candidates on the grounds of wanting to present the public with, quote, the highest quality candidates. So let's take stock, shall we? We have a corruption minister resigning over alleged corruption, a housing minister resigning over unpaid property taxes, a homelessness minister resigning over kicking out her tenants, and not to mention the powerful people like Lord Ali being given a Downing Street press pass and lavishing the cabinet with gifts. And may I remind you, this is the same Lord Ali whose Kent mansion Mandelson allegedly used to plan the 1997 general election campaign, according to The Independent in a report they did in 2003. Now, we have an ambassador to a country run by a man with ties to Epstein, who also has ties to Epstein, or at least previously, since before he was removed this morning. Is it any wonder that both the Prime Minister and the government's approval ratings are at rock bottom? Although, we may have a clue as to how we ended up in this mess, and it was revealed by Sky News political editor Sam Coates. I'm being told it was Morgan McSweeney, who is close to Mandelson, who was pushing for a better defence of him yesterday and thus to stay. He's the key link between Mandelson and number 10. Keir Starmer wasn't always a complete fan, sensing at points Mandelson, like many Blairites, had his criticisms. Morgan McSweeney is Keir Starmer's chief of staff and the linchpin of the Labour Together think tank, who engineered the end of Corbynism and ran Starmer's long-term project of becoming Labour leader and then obviously eventually Prime Minister. McSweeney himself has been touted by much of the UK media as a political savant, carefully curating Starmer's messaging to win both the leadership and general elections. Would such a savant be so careless as to open up such a huge can of worms by insisting that his key ally with so many potential skeletons in the closet maintain being appointed to such a high-profile role? Both Mandelson and McSweeney's links to the Starmer project have been known to the UK media for quite some time. It's curious how they've waited so long to actually take aim at the reality of their roles close to the Prime Minister. Now, during the election period, the only real scrutiny of Mandelson's Epstein links came from Jim Pickard of the Financial Times, back when Mandelson was someone close to Starmer's leadership team during the pre-election period. And there was essentially zero coverage of McSweeney, despite him already having press links, whom he allegedly facilitated the spread of Jeremy Corbyn's supposed anti-Semitism with, according to reporting from Anushka Astana at The Observer earlier this year. Now, here at Novara Media, however, we've been on it from the start, probably because we don't need lobby access in a way that some of them MSM do. Here's our own Rivka Brown asking Mandelson some particularly difficult questions.
Did you ride on the Lolita Express?
Do I what?
Did you ride on the Lolita Express? You didn't. You can confirm for the record. Why did Jeffrey Epstein call you Petey?
Look, lovely to talk to you, but I'm afraid I'm booked for...
Onto the Lolita Express.
onto Times Radio, and they take precedence. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. I hope they ask you some very softball questions.
I hope so.
It is indeed funny that he was on his way to talk to Times Radio at the time, From 2023 until his appointment as ambassador, he'd been hosting one of their podcasts, How to Win an Election. And at the time, that was with Daniel Finkelstein and Polly Mackenzie. It must have been awkward for Times Radio to report on this scandal, one would think. Let's see what the podcasters had to say.
Peter Mandelson's colourful background and past was well known. He'd been involved in plenty of scandals before. It's part of the reason why he made such a fantastic panelist on this very show before you were here. Was there an element that Keir Starmer was blind to what he perhaps should have thought better could be looming problems?
Look, I genuinely don't know what Keir knew and didn't know. I'm sure he didn't know the full package. I think it just would have been too risky to do. He will have known Peter's somewhat checkered past, and obviously I was around when in the previous two occasions when Peter left, and he will have known that. And the thing with Peter is Peter's brilliant. Peter is brilliant. I mean, you know Peter. Peter is brilliant, and he was a fantastic minister. The sad thing is, I think he was also a really, really good ambassador for the UK. But there's the other side of Peter that comes and haunts him, and it's Peter's own judgment about Peter is I'm afraid, the thing that is always his downfall. And I guess that's what's happened here. It's his past catching up with him. But I do think for the UK, it's actually really unfortunate.
Really? You think? It's so interesting to watch these people who just kind of gush about him, I guess because it's so awkward to admit that you were piling up to somebody who had all these close links to Jeffrey Epstein, because this is after all this information was released. It's very weird statements there, in my opinion. Talking up, was such a great minister. He had to resign twice. Like, it's very rare someone resigns once, let alone twice. And so to big him up as being such a great minister, to be such a great podcast host, given everything that we know about him, all his different kind of colourful parts of his history, they would put it, and then to just the very, very weird statement, very, very gushing statement there for someone who I don't think anyone else in the country outside of the media and political sphere have a particularly high opinion of. But the reality, it seems, is that the UK press had very little interest up until recently in letting the public know about the people really in control of Keir Starmer's decisions, both as leader and as Prime Minister. As Keir Starmer similarly has very little control over quite a lot of the decision-making himself. If you'll recall, he was described earlier this year as being sat in a driverless train by sources close to him. It must be remarked as well that everyone believed Boris Johnson would be able to weather the storm of his own scandals until the press turned on him unilaterally and the weight of the reporting twisted the arm of his cabinet to force him to resign. And the final scandal that caused the end of his premiership was his appointment of Chris Pincher. Now, whilst the appointment of Mandelson is not the same, it's not as egregious, of course, because he was just an associate of Epstein, rather than Pincher, who was the alleged perpetrator in a series of groping incidents himself. But both Starmer and Johnson were aware of what both of these appointees were implicated in at the time of their appointments. The only question is to what extent. If the Pincher scandal was enough to trigger Johnson's resignation, we must seriously question Starmer's political future. Inside sources had already intimated to the BBC's Nicholas Watt that it's only a matter of when, not if, he resigns. And if you ask me, I do not think that given everything that's happened from last July until today, that Keir Starmer is fit to be Prime Minister of this country. Dahlia, do you have confidence in the Prime Minister?
I mean, no. And I also don't have confidence in Morgan McSweeney, who allegedly is the one who is making all of these terrible decisions. A little background on Morgan McSweeney. He was widely lauded as, the man who knows how to beat the far right because he beat the BNP in Barking and Dagenham, where they were going to sort of make some electoral gains, and he was able to kind of quash that, and he was credited to be the mastermind behind that campaign. There are some articles that I read that have kind of questioned that role of him being the mastermind. But what I would say is I think he's doing an absolutely brilliant job of really, staving the far right influence away. I mean, I've never felt more safe in my life in this country. I mean, I walk down my street and, if I happen to walk past a hotel that is sheltering displaced people, refugees, I have utmost confidence that they are not at risk of being assaulted or abused by a right-wing mob. So I have to say, I'm very grateful to Morgan McSweeney that he is keeping us safe from the rising tide of the far right, a true political strategy unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. When it comes to Peter Mandelson, first of all, when you're talking about a politician's checkered past, maybe you're talking about him having an affair or, him maybe having an outside baby, a child outside of his marriage or whatever. You're not talking about being like Bezzy mates with one of the most notorious sex traffickers that we have ever known of. That is not having a checkered past. That is having existing and being connected to a world that no one with any integrity would want anywhere near their political project. And, Starmer is trying to spin this as if, the revelations of this birthday book somehow tell us something that we don't already know. That is gaslighting, and that is not true. If Rivka Brown, who, Rivka's a fantastic journalist, but she's not a fantastic journalist because she has some kind of like insight into how the elite circles run. She doesn't have her kind of ear to the ground in elite circles. She has a political analysis and integrity and, a desire to find out the truth about things. And that's what makes her a really good journalist. If Rivka Brown knew in 2023 that Peter Mandelson was perhaps inappropriately close friends with Jeffrey Epstein, then you cannot tell me that someone who was in the center of political power like Keir Starmer would not have gotten the memo. So this idea that, it wasn't common knowledge that Jeffrey Epstein and Peter Mandelson were very close, and that Peter Mandelson continued to be very close friends with him even after his convictions and these revelations. Something which, by the way, brought down, Prince Andrew. So I don't understand how it could bring down Prince Andrew, who's a literal monarch, and not bring down Peter Mandelson. But for a man like Starmer, who we believe is so obsessed with optics, is so obsessed with how things look above everything else, above anything, any kind of substantive politics, it really is an unbelievable gamble that he would take to make someone like Peter Mandelson, with the kind of baggage that we know Peter Mandelson to have, the ambassador to the US, especially when you consider the fact that he did mass purges, mass deselections of left-wing people from the Labour Party under the guise of quality control. One of those people that he tried to purge from the Labour Party under the guise of quality control was Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott, the first Black woman MP this country has ever been, who has ever had, who has faithfully served her constituents. Whatever you think of her politics, she has faithfully served her constituents for 38 years. She's the longest serving MP sitting in Parliament right now. She's a trailblazer. And Diane Abbott was not considered good enough to pass Keir Starmer's quality control, but Peter Mandelson was. What kind of quality control means that Peter Mandelson passes the sniff test, but Diane Abbott doesn't? Diane Abbott, who is so popular amongst her constituents, the people that she directly serves, that when Keir Starmer tried to boot her out of the Labour Party or stop her from running as an MP, he was forced to U-turn because her constituents flooded the streets with support for her. What other MP can get that kind of street level support from their constituents? Most people can't even name their MP because of how little they feel served by them. So that goes to tell you that whole thing was nothing to do with quality control. It was about purging people that Keir Starmer didn't feel he was able to control. And it was about signaling to a particular elite configuration that he is safe and that he is on their side. And that is, by virtue of his connections to Epstein, we know that Peter Mandelson operated within that elite circle, because Jeffrey Epstein, and this is not to kind of put him in the same category as the most egregious things that Jeffrey Epstein did. We don't have any evidence for that. We do not know that. And I'm not here to cast aspersions on that. But what we do know was that Jeffrey Epstein was a power broker of the elite. One of the techniques he used to power broke within the elite was these crimes and these nefarious activities. But he also did a whole lot of other things that were probably not to do with those kind of crimes, that were about power brokering within the elite. And Peter Mandelson was part of that elite. And so Keir Starmer, the people that Keir Starmer has chosen to surround himself with, are not people who are strategically equipped or brilliant political operators, or people with incredible policy, an incredible eye for policy, or people with talent or commitment or integrity or dedication to service. It's people who he believes can keep him protected from consequences. Because once you are in those kind of elite circles, you can only fail upwards. And Peter Mandelson is in many ways a perfect example of that.
100% agree. 100% agree. Again, the point about like his idea of optics, but also the fact that he specifically ran a campaign on probity in public life. That was the line. We're going to end the Tory chaos. We're going to be able to restore standards in public life. And we have seen anything but. And that's what it's hubris. It's the hubris of the Labour right, in my opinion. It's that fundamentally, as you say, with this kind of elite bubble surrounding, you feel like you're untouchable. And that's allowed them to make a bunch of decisions to be able to think that they can get away with things, in my opinion, that clearly they weren't able to when there was actual scrutiny placed upon them, especially given in the run-up to the election, especially, they got such an easy ride. There was precious little scrutiny of the reality of what Keir Starmer, McSweeney, McFadden, the people within that Politburo or the top of the party represented, and what they had done to get into that position in the first place, right? Because at the time, they were only hoodwinking the left. They were only aiming at the left. And we are not politically relevant. We're not worth reporting on. But suddenly, now when they're in government, I guess we'll start doing some actual scrutiny. Well, that's, again, the hubris of the Labour right laid bare, as we have seen throughout the entirety of the time in office, essentially being unable to get away with any of it.